The hush didn't feel like silence. It was the kind of hush that swelled with the weight of anticipation, where even the faintest shuffle of a shoe could sound like thunder. Studio lights bathed the stage in a golden heat, their glare catching. In the polished floorboards, as if every inch of the set were conspiring to make the moment harder to escape. Daniel Kaluuya stepped out from the wings, the applause hitting him in measured waves. On any other night, this would have been the warm embrace of an audience. Tonight, it felt more like the tightening loop of a rope. He crossed to the guest chair, his walk steady but unhurried, the lines of his suit crisp against his frame. His eyes carried a quiet calculation, the same look he'd worn on screen in scenes where every move mattered. Cameras tracked him like hawks, and he knew every micro-expression would be replayed, slowed down, dissected. Jimmy Kimmel smiled that familiar late-night smile, part charm, part provocation. They exchanged the usual greetings, they practiced. Back and forth, it gave the illusion of ease. But the air had a density to it, an electric thickness that couldn't be masked by jokes or applause signs. Somewhere out there in the online ether, hashtags were already pulsing with speculation about what might happen tonight. That it didn't take long. After the obligatory quip about the weather, the late-night host leaned in, elbows on the desk, and asked the question that had been simmering all week. "Some people are saying you've weaponized your success," Kimmel said, his tone deceptively casual. "Is that true?" A stillness fell over the room. Somewhere in the studio audience, someone laughed nervously, the sound dying in their throat when they realized no one else was laughing. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His eyes, warm a moment ago, sharpened as if focusing on something far in the distance. He let the silence stretch, the kind of pause that forces the world to lean closer. "That's absurd," he said finally, his voice low, controlled, but carrying an edge that cut through the warmth of the stage lights. Kimmel's smile didn't falter, but his posture shifted, just slightly. The kind of shift that said he knew the temperature had changed. The audience shifted too, some leaning forward, others pulling back, unsure whether they were about to witness television gold or a public unraveling. Daniel rose from his chair. With deliberate slowness, the movement smooth yet filled with a quiet defiance. The hem of his jacket caught the light as he turned away from the desk. Camera shutters clicked in rapid-fire bursts, each frame capturing a man stepping out of the script he'd been handed. His right hand slipped into his pocket, fingers brushing against the cool surface of his phone. He paused, mid-stride, a single heartbeat of hesitation. The air thickened. The crew, the audience, the millions at home, they all waited for what might come next. A quip to diffuse the tension? A fiery speech? Or nothing at all? He turned his head, just enough to let the lights catch the side of his face, and then he walked. Past the desk, past the edge of the frame, past the invisible wall where performance meets private resolve. The studio doors closed behind him with a soft thud that felt louder than the applause he'd entered to. The feed cut abruptly to a commercial. On social media, clips of the walk-off began appearing before the break had even ended. The stillness of that moment, the glare in his eyes, the abruptness of his every frame was already being pulled apart, reassembled, and judged. Somewhere, far beyond the glow of the cameras, Daniel Kaluuya exhaled. The show would go on. Without him, but the real story had only just begun. The doors closed behind him with a muted click, but the echo inside the building was deafening. Backstage, a few crew members stood frozen, their headsets buzzing with frantic voices from the control room. One producer muttered something about damage control. Another gestured toward the dressing room as if shepherding an unpredictable storm. Toward containment. Daniel ignored them. His stride was steady, but his breathing told another story, deep, measured inhales fighting against the tightening in his chest. Out in the studio, Jimmy Kimmel shuffled his cue cards, cracked a joke. to an audience too stunned to respond, and tossed to a pre-recorded segment. But the moment had already escaped the set and was rippling outward. In the seconds between Daniel's departure and the fade to commercial, someone in the second row had their phone out. By the time he reached his dressing room, the first grainy clip had already hit Twitter. The captions were ruthless. Kaluuya storms off Kimmel. Daniel can't take the heat. Man of the people? Or just another diva? But for every jab, there was a defense. Under the hashtag #StandWithKaluuya, fans began posting clips of his speeches on systemic racism, his interviews calling for more space for underrepresented voices, his quiet acts of generosity on and off set. Someone dug up the footage of his 2018 Oscars win, his voice cracking as he thanked the women in his life and the communities that raised him. In another corner of the internet, a different narrative bloomed. Opinion threads framed his exit as calculated arrogance, the mark of Valmore, a man unwilling to answer uncomfortable questions. Anonymous industry accounts whispered about backroom resentment, that other black actors felt overshadowed, that his success was pulling oxygen from the room. It was the perfect storm for a media cycle, two opposing versions of the same act, each feeding the other. By mid-morning, the talk shows had their panelists lined up. A conservative radio host declared, "This is what happens when Hollywood royalty gets challenged. They run." An activist on a rival program countered, "No, this is what happens when a black man refuses to perform contrition for a narrative built on scarcity." A media studies professor, speaking with deliberate calm, described it as the optics of withdrawal, a term that would be repeated endlessly over the next week. Daniel sat on the edge of the dressing room couch, the hum of the mini fridge, the only sound between him and his phone screen. The clips played in an endless loop, each one a mirror held at a slightly different angle. His phone buzzed with messages, friends urging him to get ahead of it, his publicist advising a measured response, his mother sending nothing but a heart emoji. One text stopped him cold. It was from a fellow actor, someone he'd once mentored on an indie set years ago. "They're twisting it," the message read. "You didn't walk out. You walked away from their game." He closed his eyes for a moment. That was the part they wouldn't see, the subtle difference between leaving a conversation and rejecting the premise of it entirely. Across Los Angeles, in a newsroom lit by the pale glow of dozens of screens, an editor barked orders. Every outlet wanted the scoop. Why he left, whether Kimmel had crossed a line, whether the rumors had merit. Somewhere, fact-checkers scrambled to verify the origin of the accusation. But the machine was already moving too fast for facts to matter. By the time the sun rose on the second day, the story had crystallized into two immovable narratives. To some, Daniel was a man under siege, standing against a tide of coded resentment. To others, he was proof of the arrogance fame inevitably breeds. Neither side was fully right. Neither was fully wrong. But in the court of public opinion, nuance was a luxury no one could afford. And the trial had only just begun. The week unfolded like a trial with no judge, no rules, and no recess. Witnesses appeared not in courtrooms, but on podcasts and Instagram stories and in hastily written Twitter threads. Each voice claimed a piece of the truth, each soundbite another exhibit in an ever-growing case file. Jordan Peele was the first high-profile figure to break silence. Speaking to a trade magazine, he dismissed the accusations with a quiet finality. "Daniel doesn't just take up space," Peele said, his hands folded on the table, his gaze steady. "He makes more of it for the rest of us." The quote traveled fast, splashed across headlines, shared with reverence by supporters who saw it as proof of Daniel's integrity. Ava DuVernay followed days later, her statement laced with controlled frustration. "It's exhausting," she told a morning show host. "A man who's poured his time and resources into uplifting others is being dragged because the system can't handle more than one black star at a time. That's not his fault. That's the industry's design. But then came the dissenters. An anonymous actor, speaking to an entertainment blog, claimed, "It feels like the opportunities are shrinking. And if one person's in every room, others can't even get through the door." The interview was vague, no specifics, no names, but it resonated with those who believed in the scarcity narrative. The piece, titled "The Kaluuya Effect," quickly went viral. Panel shows became the courtroom floor. On one, a cultural critic leaned forward, voice low and deliberate. "This isn't about Daniel the man. This is about Daniel the symbol. He's carrying the burden of centuries of exclusion, and every step forward is seen as a step over someone else. That's the sickness of the system." On another network, a pundit shot back, "Spare me the sociology lecture. If he can't take a tough question, maybe he's not the hero people think." Clips from old interviews resurfaced Kaluuya praising younger actors, quietly mentioning his role in helping them land auditions. One behind-the-scenes video from Nope showed him standing in the rain, rehearsing lines with a newcomer, refusing to leave until they nailed the scene. Supporters posted it with captions like, "This is what leadership looks like." Yet every defense seemed to breed a counterargument. One thread, written by an industry insider, claimed Kaluuya had turned down ensemble projects in favor of solo leading roles, suggesting he was choosing his brand over community representation. No one could verify the claim, but verification wasn't the currency here. Momentum was. By midweek, the ideological lines were sharp. One side saw him as a target of coded resentment, a victim of the same scarcity politics he'd spent his career dismantling. The other side saw him as a beneficiary of that same scarcity, an unintentional gatekeeper. And in the middle, Daniel himself remained silent. That the silence was strategic, or so his publicist insisted. "Every word you say now will be used as evidence," she warned during a tense call. "Let them talk themselves out. You step in when the noise reaches its peak, not before." Daniel didn't answer right away. He thought about the first time he'd seen his face on a billboard in Los Angeles. He'd felt pride, but also an unsettling awareness of how visible he'd become, how every triumph would be weighed against someone else's absence. That awareness had never left him. In the quiet of his kitchen, he replayed the voices in his head. Peel's defense, the anonymous accusation, Ava's frustration, the pundit's sneer. He pictured them lined up like witnesses on opposite sides of a courtroom, each one sure they understood the whole picture. And somewhere in that imagined courtroom, he saw himself, not at the defense table, not at the prosecution's, but standing, alone in the center, caught between two truths that refused to coexist. The jury was still out, but the verdict, once it came, would be written in headlines, hashtags, and the long memory of the industry he dared to challenge by simply existing. Behind the closed door of his modest Los Angeles apartment, a bright glare of Hollywood felt a world away. The city's pulse continued unchecked. Car horns, distant sirens, footsteps on sidewalks. But inside, Daniel sat alone, swallowed by the soft shadows of his living room. The glow from his phone screen was a pale sun illuminating the barrage of messages flooding in from every direction. Some texts carried warmth, simple affirmations like, "We've got your back," or "Keep shining." Others, cruel and piercing, called him a traitor, accused him of betraying his community, of stepping on others to get ahead. They came from strangers, trolls emboldened by the anonymity of the internet. He barely recognized the venom beneath the words, but it sliced just the same. His thumb hovered over a message from his mother, a single heart emoji, a silent anchor in the storm. She didn't need words to remind him he wasn't alone. He thought about his childhood in London, the long afternoons at drama school, the years of waiting for a break. Back then, success had seemed a distant shimmering mirage. Now it felt like a weight heavier than any role he'd ever played. His agent had warned him hours earlier. The public wants a statement, Daniel. The longer you stay quiet, the more they fill the silence with their own stories. This isn't just about your career anymore. It's about what you represent. But speaking felt like stepping into a courtroom where the walls were lined with critics armed with sound bites and social media clips. Could words fix what silence had ignited? Could a statement bridge the gap between millions who saw him as a hero and millions who saw him as a rival? He scrolled through his own memories, photos of late-night writing sessions, helping young actors polish their scripts, videos of him in candid moments mentoring crew members from marginalized backgrounds. None of it mattered in the swirl of headlines. In the public eye, he was a symbol, an idea, a lightning rod. A message from a friend caught his attention. It was from someone he'd helped years ago, a now rising star in the industry. There, twisting it, the friend wrote, you didn't walk out. You walked away from their game. Daniel exhaled slowly, closing his eyes. There was truth in that. A difference between leaving a conversation and rejecting the premise entirely. Between playing by the rules and refusing to be a player in a rigged game. Later that night, as the city lights flickered through the curtains, he paced his small kitchen. Every step echoed with the question that wouldn't let him rest. What does it mean to succeed when success itself is seen as betrayal? To rise when the very act of rising feels like pushing others down? His phone buzzed again. This time, call from his publicist. We need a plan, she said, voice tight but calm. Not just words, but a message. Something that shows you, not just the symbol, but the man. The truth behind the headlines. He nodded, though she couldn't see. The next move would have to be more than a statement. It would need to be a reckoning dot as he prepared to face the public once more. Daniel knew the path ahead was steep, littered with old prejudices and new expectations. The silence was broken, but the real dialogue, the one that could change everything, was just beginning. The moment Daniel Kaluuya's silence fractured, the battlefield shifted from private turmoil to public ideology. The conversation exploded across airwaves, social media platforms, and editorial pages. It was no longer just about a man. It was about what he represented: success, race, solidarity, and the painful politics of visibility. Hashtags flared into digital battlegrounds. On one side, too successful emerged, a bitter cry from those who felt overlooked, sidelined by a system that seemed to spotlight one black actor while leaving others in the shadows. On the other, he lifted us all, pushed back fiercely, reminding the world of Daniel's mentorship, his advocacy, his refusal to let his rise be a solitary one. Cable news programs lined up panels like judges in an ideological court. On one network, a cultural critic argued with measured urgency, this isn't about Daniel as a person. It's about how the industry commodifies black success, forcing it into a zero-sum game where one person's gain feels like another's loss. She paused, eyes piercing the camera. We must dismantle this scarcity mindset that pits us against each other. Across the dial, a conservative pundit sneered, if you can't handle the heat, maybe you shouldn't be on the stove. Daniel's walking off shows weakness, not strength. Success demands accountability. Podcasts churned out episode after episode, dissecting the Kaluuya controversy from every angle. A professor of race and media unpacked the dynamics of representation, explaining how a single black star often becomes a lightning rod, bearing the weight of centuries of exclusion. People don't just criticize him, she said. They project their fears and frustrations about limited opportunities. Meanwhile, grassroots activists seized the moment, launching campaigns calling for more expansive inclusion. One nonprofit tweeted, We don't need one star. We need a constellation. Daniel's success should open doors, not close them. Daniel's carefully drafted op-ed landed like a bombshell. In it, he wrote, "Success is not a weapon. It is a responsibility. I have never sought to diminish others, but to raise us all." The piece was shared widely, dissected, praised, and condemned in equal measure. Yet, the ideological divide remained stubborn. To some, Daniel was the embodiment of hope and progress. To others, an unintentional gatekeeper. The system's fractures, reflected in every debate, every tweet, every heated comment section. Behind the scenes, Daniel watched it all unfold. Each argument, each side's conviction, made his own position more complicated. The conversation was no longer just about him. It was about a culture wrestling with how to value, share, and recognize Black excellence without turning it into a competition. In this cultural crucible, Daniel stood at a crossroads, not just of fame, but of identity, responsibility, and the very meaning of success in a fractured world. The moment Daniel Kaluuya's silence fractured, the battlefield shifted from private turmoil to public ideology. The conversation exploded across airwaves, social media platforms, and editorial pages. It was no longer just about a man. It was about what he represented: success, race, solidarity, and the painful politics of visibility. Hashtags flared into digital battlegrounds. On one side, too successful emerged, a bitter cry from those who felt overlooked, sidelined by a system that seemed to spotlight one Black actor while leaving others in the shadows. On the other, he lifted us all, pushed back fiercely, reminding the world of Daniel's mentorship, his advocacy, his refusal to let his rise be a solitary one. Cable news programs lined up panels like judges in an ideological court. On one network, a cultural critic argued with measured urgency, "This isn't about Daniel as a person. It's about how the industry commodifies Black success, forcing it into a zero-sum game where one person's gain feels like another's loss." She paused, eyes piercing the camera. "We must dismantle this scarcity mindset that pits us against each other." Across the dial, a conservative pundit sneered, "If you can't handle the heat, maybe you shouldn't be on the stove." Daniel's walking off shows weakness, not strength. Success demands accountability. Podcasts churned out episode after episode, dissecting the Kaluuya controversy from every angle. A professor of race and media unpacked the dynamics of representation, explaining how a single Black star often becomes a lightning rod, bearing the weight of centuries of exclusion. "People don't just criticize him," she said. "They project their fears and frustrations about limited opportunities." Meanwhile, grassroots activists seized the moment, launching campaigns calling for more expansive inclusion. One nonprofit tweeted, "We don't need one star. We need a constellation." Daniel's success should open doors, not close them. Daniel's carefully drafted op-ed landed like a bombshell. In it, he wrote, "Success is not a weapon. It is a responsibility. I have never sought to diminish others, but to raise us all." The piece was shared widely, dissected, praised, and condemned in equal measure. Yet, the ideological divide remains stubborn. To some, Daniel was the embodiment of hope and progress. To others, an unintentional gatekeeper. The system's fractures, reflected in every debate, every tweet, every heated comment section. Behind the scenes, Daniel watched it all unfold. Each argument, each side's conviction, made his own position more complicated. The conversation was no longer just about him. It was about a culture wrestling with how to value, share, and recognize Black excellence without turning it into a competition. In this cultural crucible, Daniel stood at a crossroads, not just of fame, but of identity, responsibility, and the very meaning of success in a fractured world. The moment Daniel Kaluuya's silence fractured, The battlefield shifted from private turmoil to public ideology. The conversation exploded across airwaves, social media platforms, and editorial pages. It was no longer just about a man. It was about what he represented: success, race, solidarity, and the painful politics of visibility. Hashtags flared into digital battlegrounds. On one side, two successful emerged, a bitter cry from those who felt overlooked, sidelined by a system that seemed to spotlight one black actor while leaving others in the shadows. On the other, he lifted us all, pushed back fiercely, reminding the world of Daniel's mentorship, his advocacy, his refusal to let his rise be a solitary one. Cable news programs lined up panels like judges in an ideological court. On one network, a cultural critic argued with measured urgency, "This isn't about Daniel as a person. It's about how the industry commodifies black success, forcing it into a zero-sum game where one person's gain feels like another's loss." She paused, eyes piercing the camera. "We must dismantle this scarcity mindset that pits us against each other." Across the dial, a conservative pundit sneered, "If you can't handle the heat, maybe you shouldn't be on the stove." Daniel's walking off shows weakness, not strength. Success demands accountability. Podcasts churned out episode after episode, dissecting the Kaluuya controversy from every angle. A professor of race and media unpacked the dynamics of representation, explaining how a single black star often becomes a lightning rod, bearing the weight of centuries of exclusion. "People don't just criticize him," she said. "They project their fears and frustrations about limited opportunities." Meanwhile, grassroots activists seized the moment, launching campaigns calling for more expansive inclusion. One nonprofit tweeted, "We don't need one star. We need a constellation." Daniel's success should open doors, not close them. Daniel's carefully drafted op-ed landed like a bombshell. In it, he wrote, "Success is not a weapon. It is a responsibility. I have never sought to diminish others, but to raise us all." The piece was shared widely, dissected, praised, and condemned in equal measure. Yet, the ideological divide remains stubborn. To some, Daniel was the embodiment of hope and progress. To others, an unintentional gatekeeper. The system's fractures, reflected in every debate, every tweet, every heated comment section. Behind the scenes, Daniel watched it all unfold. Each argument, each side's conviction, made his own position more complicated. The conversation was no longer just about him. It was about a culture wrestling with how to value, share, and recognize black excellence without turning it into a competition in this cultural crucible. Daniel stood at a crossroads, not just of fame, but of identity, responsibility, and the very meaning of success in a fractured world. Days after his op-ed sent shockwaves through the industry, the atmosphere began to shift, subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, like the turning of a tide beneath a still surface. Daniel Kaluuya's words sparked conversations that extended beyond late-night talk shows and Twitter storms, reaching into boardrooms, classrooms, and creative spaces where change could take root. A coalition of emerging black directors announced the launch of the Kaluuya Mentorship Fund, crowdfunded by industry allies inspired by Daniel's public stance. Their mission was clear: to nurture underrepresented voices and dismantle the barriers that had long constrained opportunity. Social media buzzed with clips of young filmmakers expressing gratitude, sharing how this gesture felt like a door finally opening after years of knocking. Meanwhile, at major film festivals, organizers revised their selection criteria, committing to greater inclusivity. Panels focused on systemic reform replaced the usual glamour, shifting attention to the stories and storytellers that had been historically marginalized. The ripple effect touched award committees, prompting discussions about equitable nominating processes and diverse voting bodies. Late-night hosts, who had once lampooned the controversy, pivoted towards earnest dialogue. Instead of jokes, segments featured roundtable discussions with scholars, activists, and creatives dissecting the complexities of representation. Viewers saw, perhaps for the first time, the weight of the systemic issues underpinning the headlines. In quieter moments, Daniel continued his work away from the cameras, mentoring, collaborating, and quietly supporting the next generation. On set, he was seen encouraging co-stars, offering advice, and sharing credit. A candid photo surfaced showing him laughing with a young actor, a subtle but powerful testament to his commitment. The narrative had transformed from confrontation to coalition. Daniel's walk-off was no longer a symbol of division, but a catalyst for solidarity. His name became synonymous with a movement striving not just for visibility, but for structural change. A voiceover closes this chapter, quoting a Nigerian proverb: "If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together." The image lingers on Daniel on a bustling film set, smiling warmly as a crew member approaches with a new script, the future unfolding in every shared moment. Justice, in its own way, had been served. Transformation sparked by Daniel's stand was far from seamless. Beneath the surface of progress, old tensions simmered, reminding everyone that change was a marathon, not a sprint. Industry veterans, long accustomed to gatekeeping, bristled at the shifting landscape. In exclusive lounges and behind closed doors, whispers spread, some laced with resentment, others tinged with fear. "This new wave," one remarked, "thinks it can rewrite the rules overnight." Yet the younger generation pressed forward, emboldened by the momentum Daniel helped ignite. At film schools, classrooms buzzed with discussions about representation, agency, and responsibility. Students dissected Daniel's journey, not just as fans, but as future creators ready to challenge the status quo. Meanwhile, mainstream media began to reflect a more nuanced narrative. Profiles of Daniel moved beyond controversy to highlight his activism, his humility, and the countless unseen moments of mentorship. Interviews revealed a man grappling with the paradox of success in a fractured industry, celebrated, scrutinized, and still striving. Public opinion, once sharply divided, began to soften. Polls showed a growing recognition of the systemic challenges Daniel had spotlighted. Conversations shifted from, "Is he right or wrong?" to, "What must change?" In Hollywood, changes were measured but meaningful. New diversity quotas, inclusive writers' rooms, and more opportunities for marginalized voices to shape stories behind the camera. Daniel found himself at the center of panels and summits, a reluctant but powerful ambassador for change. Yet he remained grounded, aware that the fight was far from over. One evening, after a long day on set, he told a close friend, "It's not about being the loudest voice. It's about making sure the right voices are heard." As this chapter closes, the camera pulls back to reveal a skyline glittering with possibility but shadowed by challenge. The story of Daniel Kaluuya is no longer just about one man's walk-off, but about a movement's journey, a complex, ongoing struggle for justice, equity, and the true meaning of success. The screen fades to black, leaving the audience with a question: what will you do when the spotlight shifts? The controversy that had once threatened to consume Daniel Kaluuya began to recede into a more reflective phase, but the lessons it left behind continued to resonate powerfully. As the dust settled, a new narrative emerged, one focused on accountability, growth, and the complexities of navigating fame in a fractured society. In a candid interview with a leading cultural magazine, Daniel opened up about the personal toll of the ordeal. "Walking off wasn't just an act of defiance," he said quietly. "It was a moment of truth for myself and for the industry. It forced me to confront what it means to be seen, to be heard, and to carry the expectations of many on my shoulders." The interview was raw, unfiltered, exposing vulnerabilities that the public rarely glimpsed. He spoke of late nights wrestling with doubt, the weight of representation, and the pressure to be a role model while maintaining his own identity. It's a balance, he reflected, between staying true to who you are and pushing for something bigger than yourself.